Ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you a question today. Are you tired? Are you anxious? Do you lie awake at night wondering how you're going to fix all the problems in your life? We live in a world filled with uncertainty. Every day we hear about wars, disasters, economic troubles, and personal struggles. We worry about our families, our jobs, our future. We carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, trying to figure everything out on our own. But let me tell you something today. God never meant for you to carry that burden alone. From the moment we take our first breath, life brings challenges, uncertainties, and struggles. No one is immune to the weight of worry. We worry about our families, our jobs, our health, and our future. We wonder if we're making the right decisions, if we're strong enough to face what's ahead, and if things will ever get better. Worry can creep into our hearts like a shadow, growing heavier each day until we find ourselves overwhelmed and exhausted. But there is good news. God cares about your worries. He sees every burden you carry, and He is inviting you to lay them down at His feet. The Bible tells us in 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. These are not just words, they are a promise. God is not distant or indifferent to your struggles. He is not too busy to hear your prayers or too far away to reach you. He is a loving Father who deeply cares about every detail of your life. When you cry, He sees your tears. When your heart is heavy, He knows your pain. When you feel alone, He is right there beside you. Many people struggle to believe that God truly cares about them. They may think, why would God care about my little problems when there are so many bigger issues in the world? But the truth is, nothing is too small or too big for God. The same God who holds the universe in His hands also holds your heart. He knows the number of hairs on your head, and He is aware of every thought that troubles your mind. Matthew 6:26 reminds us that if God cares for the birds of the air, providing them with food and shelter, how much more will He care for us, His children? In the midst of worry, it is easy to feel like we must carry our burdens alone. We try to figure everything out, make all the right choices, and control every outcome. But God never intended for us to bear the weight of our worries by ourselves. He calls us to cast them upon Him. Imagine a person carrying a heavy load on their back, struggling with each step, exhausted from the weight pressing down on them. Now, imagine someone coming alongside them and saying, "Let me carry that for you." God is offering. He wants to take the burden from your shoulders and replace it with His peace. One of the most powerful examples of God's care can be seen in the life of Jesus. Throughout His ministry, He met people in their deepest moments of worry and pain. He comforted the brokenhearted, healed the sick, and assured those who were anxious that they were not forgotten. When the disciples were caught in a storm, afraid for their lives, Jesus calmed the winds and the waves, showing them that He had power over their fears. When Martha was anxious about many things, Jesus reminded her to rest in Him. When people brought their troubles before Him, He never turned them away. He listened, He cared, and He acted in love. Worry often stems from the fear of the unknown. We wonder what tomorrow will bring, if our prayers will be answered, or if things will work out the way we hope. But God does not want us to live in fear. He calls us to trust in Him, to lean on His understanding rather than our own. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." When we trust that God is in control, we no longer have to carry the burden of worry. God's care is not temporary and it is not conditional. It does not depend on how strong your faith is or how good you have been. His love is constant and his concern for you never fades. There will be moments when you feel like no one understands what you are going through, but God does. He knows every silent prayer, every sleepless night, and every fear that grips your heart. He is always near, ready to comfort and strengthen you. One of the greatest ways to experience God's care is through prayer. Prayer is not just a religious duty. It is an open invitation to bring your worries to the one who has the power to change things. Philippians 4:6-7 tells us, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." When you pray, you are not just speaking into the air. You are speaking to a God who listens, a God who moves, and a God who cares. No matter what you are facing today, remember that you are not alone. You do not have to walk this road by yourself. God sees you, He loves you, and He cares about every worry that weighs on your heart. He is inviting you to release your fears into His hands and trust that He will lead you through. There is no burden too great for Him and no fear that He cannot replace with His perfect peace. Worry is something that affects every person at some point in life. It creeps into our thoughts, weighs on our hearts, and often feels impossible to escape. We worry about the future, our families, our jobs, our health, and so much more. It feels natural to worry because we want to be in control. We want to make sure things turn out the way we hope. But the truth is, no amount of worrying has ever changed an outcome. Worry accomplishes nothing. It steals peace, drains joy, and distracts from the blessings that are already present in our lives. Jesus himself spoke directly about the futility of worry in Matthew 6:27, saying, "Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life?" This question is powerful because it reminds us that worry does not solve problems. It does not lengthen life, nor does it improve circumstances. Instead, it robs people of the ability to fully live. Worry keeps the mind stuck in a cycle of fear, imagining worst-case scenarios and creating problems that may never even happen. It causes unnecessary stress, leading to anxiety, frustration, and exhaustion. Many people believe that worrying is a sign of responsibility, that if they do not worry about something, it means they do not care enough. But true responsibility is not found in worrying, it is found in trust. Trusting God does not mean ignoring problems or pretending difficulties do not exist. It means recognizing that there is only so much a person can do, and that beyond that, everything is in God's hand. No matter how much someone worries about tomorrow, they cannot control it. No matter how much they stress over the future, they cannot predict it. But God knows the future. He holds time in His hands, and He calls His children to trust Him rather than be consumed by fear. Worry is often rooted in the need for control. People want certainty, security, and the assurance that everything will be okay. But the reality is that control is an illusion. Life is unpredictable. Situations change, circumstances shift, and no person can truly know what tomorrow will bring. However, God does. He sees the bigger picture, and He is never caught off guard. The same God who provided for His people in the wilderness, who fed the 5,000 with a few loaves and fish, and who calmed the raging storm with just His words, is the same God who is watching over His children today. He has proven His faithfulness time and time again. The problem with worry is that it keeps people from fully living in the present. It causes distraction, making it difficult to focus on what truly matters. It blinds people to the blessings in front of them because their minds are so preoccupied with what might happen in the future. Worry creates fear where there should be faith, doubt where there should be trust, and despair where there should be hope. It makes small problems seem bigger than they are and makes solutions feel impossible. But God does not want his people to live in fear. He calls them to faith. Philippians 4:6-7 gives a clear alternative to worry. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Instead of worrying, God calls his children to pray. Instead of focusing on what could go wrong, he calls them to focus on him. He promises peace, not just any peace, but peace that goes beyond human understanding. This kind of peace is not dependent on circumstances. It is dependent on trust in God. It is a peace that remains steady, even in the face of uncertainty. When Jesus spoke about worry, he also reminded his followers to look at the world around them. He pointed to the birds of the air and the flowers of the field, saying that if God takes care of them, how much more will he take care of his children? Birds do not worry about where their next meal will come from, yet God provides for them. Flowers do not stress about how they will grow, yet God clothes them in beauty. If he is faithful to them, he will surely be faithful to those who belong to him. Many times, worry is based on fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of loss. But fear is not from God. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Worry contradicts the very nature of faith. Faith says God is in control and he will take care of me. Worry says I must figure everything out on my own. But God never intended for his people to live burdened by fear. He invites them to trust in him fully, to release their anxieties, and to live in the freedom of his peace. When worry tries to take hold, the best response is to shift focus back to God. He is bigger than any problem, stronger than any fear, and more faithful than any human understanding can grasp. He has promised to provide, to lead, and to work all things for the good of those who love him. Worry accomplishes nothing, but faith in God accomplishes everything. Fear is one of the greatest obstacles people face in life. It has the power to paralyze, to make people hesitate when they should move forward, and to cause doubt where there should be faith. Fear whispers that things will never get better, that the future is uncertain, and that failure is inevitable. But the truth is, fear is a liar. It is not from God, and it is not the voice his children are meant to listen to. No matter how strong fear may seem, it is nothing compared to the power of God's plan. His plan is greater than every fear, every doubt, and every worry that tries to take hold of the heart. Throughout history, there have been countless examples of people who faced fear yet chose to trust in God's plan. When God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses was afraid. He doubted his ability, worried about what others would think, and even tried to convince God that he was the wrong person for the job. But God's plan was greater than Moses' fears. He equipped him, strengthened him, and guided him every step of the way. The same God who parted the Red Sea and led his people to freedom is the same God who leads his children today. He does not call people to live in fear. He calls them to walk by faith. Fear often arises when the future is uncertain. People want to know what will happen next, to have every detail laid out before them so they can feel secure. But faith does not work that way. Faith is trusting in God even when the path is unclear. It is believing that his plan is good even when circumstances seem difficult. Proverbs 3:05, Proverbs 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." God's plan is not dependent on human understanding. It is not limited by what people see or comprehend. He is always at work, even when it is not obvious. One of the most comforting truths in Scripture is that God has a purpose for every person's life. Jeremiah 29:11 declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." These words were spoken to people who were facing hardship, uncertainty, and fear. Yet God reminded them that His plan was greater. His plan was not for destruction, but for hope. That same promise is true today. No matter what fears arise, God's plan remains firm. He is always leading His children toward His perfect will, even when the journey is challenging. Fear also tries to convince people that they are not strong enough, not good enough, and not capable of fulfilling God's purpose. But the Bible is filled with stories of people who felt unqualified, yet were used by God in incredible ways. Gideon was afraid, yet God called him a mighty warrior. David was just a shepherd boy, yet God anointed him as king. Esther risked her life to save her people, and God gave her the courage to stand firm. Every single one of them had reasons to be afraid, but they chose to trust in God's plan instead. And because they trusted Him, He led them to victory. The enemy wants people to focus on their fears so they lose sight of God's plan. He wants them to believe that their past mistakes disqualify them, that their weaknesses make them unusable, and that their struggles mean they are alone. But those are lies. God's plan is never hindered by human weakness. In fact, He works through it. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God's strength is revealed when His people trust Him despite their fears. Trusting in God's plan does not mean that life will always be easy. There will still be challenges, setbacks, and moments of uncertainty. But it does mean that no matter what happens, God is in control. He is never surprised, never caught off guard, and never without a solution. Even when things seem hopeless, He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating His plan in ways that may not be immediately visible. What seems like a setback may actually be a setup for something greater. What looks like a closed door may be God's way of redirecting towards something better. Fear will always try to hold people back, but it does not have to win. God's plan is greater. His purpose is stronger. His love is deeper. When fear says you can't, God says, with me all things are possible. When fear says you're alone, God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. When fear says, what if things go wrong? God says, I work all things together for good. Choosing to trust in God's plan is not always easy, but it is always worth it. He sees the whole picture while people only see a small part. He knows what is best even when it does not make sense. He has never failed and He never will. No matter what fear whispers, no matter how uncertain the future looks, one truth remains unshaken. God's plan is always greater than fear. Faith is often talked about as a source of strength, a foundation that gives people hope in difficult times. But what many do not realize is that true faith requires surrender. It is not just about believing that God exists or that He is powerful. It is about fully trusting Him with every part of life, even when things feel uncertain, even when the future is unclear, and even when it means letting go of control. Surrender is not a sign of weakness. It is an act of trust. It is choosing to put everything into God's hands rather than holding on in fear. One of the biggest struggles people face is the desire to control their own lives. There is a natural tendency to want to plan everything, to have a clear path forward, and to make sure things happen a certain way. But faith calls for something different. It calls for a willingness to let go, to trust that God knows what is best, and to follow Him even when the path does not make sense. Proverbs 3:05-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." This verse makes it clear that surrender is necessary for true faith. Trusting in God means relying on his wisdom rather than our own. It means recognizing that his ways are higher and his plans are greater, even when we cannot see the full picture. Surrender is not just about the big decisions in life, it is about the small ones too. It is about trusting God in every moment, in every situation, and in every challenge. It is about releasing the need to figure everything out, and instead believing that God is already at work. Many times, people hold on to worry, stress, and anxiety because they feel responsible for fixing everything on their own. But Jesus gives a different command. In Matthew 11:28-30, he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This is a direct invitation to surrender. It is an invitation to stop carrying burdens alone and to trust that God will take care of them. One of the greatest examples of surrender in the Bible is Abraham. God asked him to leave his homeland and go to a place that he had never seen before. Abraham had no roadmap, no clear instructions, only a promise that God would lead him. It would have been easy for him to resist, to demand more information, or to refuse out of fear. But instead he obeyed. He trusted that God's plan was better than his own. Later, when God tested him by asking him to sacrifice his son Isaac, Abraham once again showed complete surrender. Even though he did not understand, he trusted that God had a purpose. And because of his faith, God provided a way. Abraham's story is a powerful reminder that when we surrender, God is always faithful. Surrender is not always easy. It requires humility. It requires admitting that we do not have all the answers. It requires letting go of pride and acknowledging that God is in control. Many times people hesitate to surrender because they are afraid of what will happen if they do. They wonder if God's plan will align with their own desires. They fear that letting go means losing something important. But the reality is that God's plans are always better. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Surrendering to God does not mean giving up dreams. It means trusting that God will lead to something even greater. Jesus himself modeled surrender in the most powerful way. In the Garden of Gethsemane, on the night before his crucifixion, he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. Even in his deepest agony, he surrendered to the Father's will. He did not cling to his own desires, but chose obedience, even when it led to suffering. His surrender brought salvation to the world. His act of trust became the ultimate example of what it means to have faith. Surrender does not mean life will be without challenges. There will still be moments of uncertainty, moments of fear, and moments when things do not go as planned. But surrender brings peace. It removes the heavy burden of trying to control everything. It replaces anxiety with trust. It allows God to work freely without resistance. When people surrender, they open themselves up to the fullness of what God has in store. Many people struggle to surrender because they are waiting for complete understanding. They want to know every step before they take the first one. But faith does not work that way. Faith requires stepping forward, even when the outcome is unknown. It requires trusting that God will provide, even when resources seem scarce. It requires believing in his goodness, even when circumstances are difficult. When people choose to surrender, they are choosing freedom. They are choosing to walk in God's strength instead of their own. They are choosing to live by faith rather than by fear. And in that surrender, they will find that God is always faithful, always good, and always in control. Anxiety is something that weighs heavily on the hearts of many. It fills the mind with worry, the heart with fear, and the soul with restlessness. It keeps people awake at night, making them replay scenarios over and over again, wondering what will happen next. It creates a constant state of unease, making it difficult to enjoy the present because the mind is so consumed with what could go wrong in the future. But God never intended for His children to live in anxiety. He offers something far greater, His peace. He replaces fear with faith, restlessness with calm, and worry with trust. His peace is unlike anything the world can give. It is not based on circumstances or fleeting emotions, but on His unchanging presence. Jesus spoke directly about anxiety and offered an alternative in John 14:27 when He said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." The peace that Jesus gives is not like the temporary comfort the world offers. The world says peace comes when everything is going well, when problems are solved, and when life is in order. But God's peace is different. It exists even in the middle of chaos. It remains steady even when circumstances are uncertain. It is not dependent on what is happening around a person, but rather on the one who holds all things together. Anxiety thrives on uncertainty. It comes from the fear of the unknown, the desire for control, and the worry that things might not turn out the way one hopes. But God's peace does not require everything to be known or understood. It comes from trusting that He's in control, even when life feels uncertain. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This verse gives a clear exchange. When people bring their worries to God, He gives them His peace in return. Instead of holding on to fear, they are invited to lay everything before Him in prayer, knowing that He cares deeply for them. One of the reasons anxiety is so powerful is that it keeps people focused on their problems rather than on God. It magnifies difficulties, making them seem bigger than they are. It creates the illusion that everything depends on human effort and that there is no way out. But when the focus shifts from problems to God, peace begins to take over. Isaiah 26:03 says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." Peace is not found in having all the answers, but in trusting the one who does. It is found in surrendering the need to control everything and instead placing faith in God's perfect plan. The Bible gives many examples of God replacing anxiety with peace. When the disciples were in a boat during a violent storm, they were terrified. They thought they were going to drown. But Jesus was with them, and with just a few words, He calmed the storm. In that moment, He demonstrated that His presence brings peace even in the middle of life's greatest fears. The same is true today. No matter how overwhelming life's storms may seem, God is greater. He has the power to calm every fear, to quiet every anxious thought, and to bring peace that surpasses understanding. Another example is found in the story of Martha and Mary. Martha was anxious and distracted, overwhelmed by all the tasks she needed to complete. But Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet, listening to Him, resting in His presence. Jesus told Martha that she was worried about many things, but that only one thing was truly needed: time with Him. This story is a reminder that peace is found in drawing near to God. When life becomes overwhelming, the solution is not to work harder or to try to control everything, but to rest in His presence. Many people believe that peace will come once their problems are solved. They think that once they get the job they need, the relationship they desire, or the security they long for, then they will feel at peace. But true peace does not come from external circumstances. It comes from within, from knowing that no matter what happens, God is in control. It is possible to have everything in life and still feel anxious, just as it is possible to have very little and still feel completely at peace. That is because peace is not about what a person has, but about who they trust. Fear and anxiety will always try to take over, but they do not have to win. God's peace is always available. It is a gift freely given to those who choose to trust Him. It does not mean that difficulties will disappear or that life will always be easy, but it does mean that no matter what comes, His peace will remain. It is a peace that stands firm in the face of uncertainty, that strengthens in the midst of trials, and that reminds every heart that they are never alone. Trusting God is not just a thought or a feeling. It requires action. It is one thing to say that God is in control, but it is another to live each day as if that is true. Many people struggle with fear, doubt, and uncertainty, waiting for the perfect moment to trust Him. But faith is not about waiting until everything makes sense. It is about stepping forward even when the path is unclear. Trusting God is a daily decision, and it is one that requires action today, not someday in the future. One of the biggest obstacles to trust is fear. Fear makes people hesitate, keeping them stuck in the same place instead of moving forward in faith. It whispers lies, telling them that things will go wrong, that they will fail, and that they are not strong enough. But fear is not from God. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Fear is the enemy of trust, but God has given everything needed to overcome it. Instead of fear, He gives power. Instead of worry, He gives peace. Instead of doubt, He gives faith. Trusting God today means letting go of the need to control everything. Many people want to trust God, but they also want to hold on to their own plans. They pray for guidance, but then hesitate to follow where He leads. Proverbs 3:05-6 gives clear instruction. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. This kind of trust means releasing control. It means believing that God's way is better even when it does not make sense. It means choosing faith over fear and obedience over hesitation. One of the greatest examples of taking action in trust is found in the story of Peter walking on water. When Jesus called Peter out of the boat, He had to make a choice. He could have stayed where it was safe, where he was comfortable, or he could take a step of faith. He chose to trust Jesus and stepped onto the water. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked in faith. But the moment he focused on the wind and waves, he began to sink. This story teaches a powerful lesson. Trusting God requires action, and that action must be focused on Him. When faith is placed in circumstances, fear takes over. But when faith is placed in Jesus, He provides the strength to move forward. Trusting God is not just about big life decisions, it is about the small, everyday choices as well. It is about choosing faith when worry tries to creep in. It is about praying instead of stressing. It is about taking the next step even when it feels uncertain. Some people wait for a sign, hoping that God will remove every obstacle before they move forward. But faith does not work that way. God often asks people to step out in trust before they see the full picture. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, it did not part immediately. It was only after they obeyed and moved forward that God made a way. Taking action in trust also means surrendering personal timelines. Many people struggle with trusting God because they want things to happen in their own time. They have plans, dreams, and goals, and when things do not happen as expected, they begin to doubt. But God's timing is perfect. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Trusting God means believing that His timing is better than human plans. It means knowing that delays are not denials and that He is working even when it is not immediately visible. One of the greatest blessings of trusting God is peace. Worry and stress come from trying to control things that are not meant to be controlled. But when trust is placed fully in God, there is freedom. There is peace in knowing that He is in control. Philippians 4:6-7 reminds believers, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Peace is a direct result of trust. When people stop trying to carry everything on their own and instead rely on God, He fills them with His peace. Trusting God today means not waiting for perfect conditions. It means choosing faith now in the middle of uncertainty. It means stepping forward even when the destination is unclear. It means surrendering fears, doubts, and worries and placing them in His hands. It is not always easy, but it is always worth it, because when trust is placed in God, He never fails. He is always faithful, always in control, and always working for the good of those who love Him.